Basic psychology. Ainsworth's strange situation. The Strange Situation Study 1971 to 1978. The Strange Situation Study is a study that was conducted between 1971 and 1978 to assess how securely attached infants between 9 and 18 months were to their caregiver.
That's fascinating. How did they do that?
The study involved 7 episodes, each lasting about 3 minutes, where the infant was placed in mildly stressful situations with their caregiver and a stranger.
What were the 7 episodes?
The caregiver would enter the room, place the child on the floor, and sit down without interacting. Then a stranger would enter, talk to the caregiver, and approach the child with a toy.
Interesting. What happened next?
The caregiver would then leave the room. If the infant played, the stranger would observe, without interruption. If the child was passive, the stranger would try to engage them. And if the child showed distress, the stranger would attempt to comfort them.
I see. And what did they observe from this?
Based on the infant's reactions, the researchers identified 3 main attachment styles: secure, insecure avoidant, and insecure resistant.
Can you explain those attachment styles in more detail?
Securely attached infants showed some anxiety when the caregiver left, but were easily soothed and happy when reunited. They used the caregiver as a safe base to explore their environment. Insecure avoidant infants showed indifference to the caregiver leaving and may have avoided contact when they returned. Insecure resistant infants became very distressed when the caregiver left and had a hard time being consoled when they returned. Evaluating Ainsworth's Strange Situation Study. Did you know that one major criticism of the Strange Situation Study is that it only measured the relationship type with one of the primary attachment figures, usually the mother?
Oh, I wasn't aware of that. Why is that a problem?
Well, the study may have wrongly assumed that children are more attached to their mothers, when in reality they may be more attached to their fathers or other primary caregivers.
I see. So the study may lack internal validity if it's not actually measuring attachment with the primary caregiver in some cases.
Exactly. Another criticism is that the study intentionally put children through stressful situations, which raises ethical concerns. In fact, 20% of the children cried desperately at one point.
That's really concerning. Deliberately causing emotional harm to children goes against psychological ethical guidelines.
Absolutely. The study was also primarily based on Western culture, so it may suffer from cultural bias and lack population validity when generalizing to other cultures.
I didn't realize that. So the findings and conclusions may only apply to Western societies?
Yes, that's a valid point. The study also lacked ecological validity, as it was conducted in a controlled laboratory setting, which may not reflect real-world attachment behaviors.
That's an important limitation to consider. But the study did have some strengths, right?
You're right. One of the strengths is that it allowed researchers to replicate the study and test the reliability of the findings. It also gave them greater control over extraneous variables.
I see. And there's also evidence of another attachment type that Ainsworth's research didn't cover, isn't that correct?
Absolutely. Main and Solomon, 1986, found a 4th attachment type called insecure disorganized, which Ainsworth's research didn't explain. IJzendoorn's study into cultural variations in attachment. A meta-analysis by IJzendoorn examined over 2,000 cases from 8 different countries.
Wow, that's a large sample size. What were the key findings?
They found that the most common attachment type was secure, followed by insecure avoidant, across most countries.
That's good to hear. So attachment behavior is consistent globally?
Yes, the study showed that the variation within cultures was 1.5 times higher than the variation between cultures.
Interesting. So secure attachment seems to be a universal pattern, not just limited to Western cultures?
Exactly. This supports the view that attachment is an innate biological process that aids social and emotional development.
That makes sense. But were there any cultural differences in the findings?
Yes, there were some notable exceptions. For example, German children tended to be classified as insecurely attached, likely due to cultural child-rearing practices.
I see. So the strange situation test used to measure attachment may not be universally applicable across cultures?
Precisely. The study also found high rates of insecure resistant attachment in Japanese infants, who showed extreme anxiety when alone.
Fascinating. This really highlights the importance of considering cultural context when studying attachment behavior.
Evaluating IJzendoorn's cultural variations in attachment study. Did you know that there are cross-cultural similarities in attachment behavior? This suggests a strong case for Bowlby's attachment theory.
Really? I thought attachment behavior would be more influenced by cultural differences.
That's a good point. The similarity in attachment behavior across cultures could be explained by media influences, not necessarily biological processes.
That's an interesting perspective. Can you give me an example of how media influences could shape attachment behavior?
Sure, for instance, television and books often portray ideas on what parenting should be like, which can influence parents and children across cultures.
I see. So the cultural similarities may not be due to innate biological factors, but rather shared media influences.
Exactly. Another issue is the imposed ethic or Western cultural values in attachment research. For example, in Japanese culture, dependence is seen as a form of secure attachment, which may not align with Western ideals.
Wow, I didn't realize that. So the strange situation scenario used in Ainsworth's research may not accurately measure attachment behavior in non-Western cultures.
Precisely. Researchers need to be cautious about generalizing their findings across cultures, as there can be significant intercultural differences as well.
That's a really important point. Can you give me an example of intercultural differences in attachment behavior?
Sure, studies have found that attachment behavior can vary based on socioeconomic background, even within the same culture. For instance, some U.S. samples showed higher rates of insecure attachment in lower-income families.
Fascinating. It seems like there's a lot more complexity to attachment theory than I realized.